Hey everyone, let's talk about governance and the nonprofit board. Um, any incorporated nonprofit organization has to have a governing board under most state laws. As a matter of law, this board constitutes the organization. Boards can be incredibly useful tools for moving an organization forward, for developing kind of a collective intent, a collective momentum. They can also be a huge detriment. There's also a benefit from a liability standpoint. And from kind of a decision making standpoint, there is a benefit by having a board. But boards are organized in a variety of ways, but all have a core legal responsibility to address. Again, there's a difference between an advisory board and a governing board, one that actually sets policies. And we're talking about a governing board. You can have advisory boards all over the place, and they don't have the same importance or the same role as what we're going to be talking about today. It's an essential source of leadership as they govern and help a nonprofit to move forward, establishing linkages with other organizations and with other professionals. They're a critical link between a nonprofit and the community. Like I said, it really connects the organization to the community. So those that you have on your board, once you're in a leadership position, you have to be very strategic about the membership. The board effectiveness is integral to organizational effectiveness. Effective board trickles down into an effective organization. And then it comes down to member effectiveness is central to board success. So you have to make sure that you have a well thought out, well organized, mindful board. So again, looking at the slide, the governance in the board, governance organization function. It is the process of providing strategic leadership. That's the key thing. Most boards provide strategic leadership, not day-to-day operations or decision making. Some boards can meander their way into that, and that can be very difficult for you as a leader and for a manager. It really begins with making an informed organizational choices. That's what the board is supposed to do, and they leave the day-to-day operations to you. So the board itself is a structure of the organization that exists to govern, to perform the work of governance. Very straightforward. It sets the direction. It makes decisions about policies and strategy. That policy procedures manual that we played with 2 weeks ago, that would be approved by the board. What that does is it gives the legitimacy for that policies and procedures, and you have a liability coverage. Is you've had another group review, your governing board has reviewed it. So boards are a really useful tool. They help cover you in a lot of ways. It's political as well as organizational and involves engaging multiple stakeholders. The CEO or director and other leadership staff play a role in this, especially in larger organizations. Effective governance and strategy are integral to the sustainability and long-term effectiveness of a nonprofit. Nonprofits must continually renew and assess and review what they are doing, who they are serving, and what the needs and interests of the community are. Stagnation is a death sentence for an organization. We have to be continuing to grow and adapt and be dynamic, because the people and communities around us, no matter how static we may think they are, they're still changing. Unlike the business world, where decisions are primarily based on profit, choices for nonprofits are about how best to have an impact. So accountability, the process of holding actors responsible for actions. That's what the board does. There's 4 competencies. Transparency, definitely want the board to be transparent. Going into executive session all the time is not always a good solution. There has to be answerability and justification of their decision making. It needs to be transparent, using the scientific approach. data-based decision making. That the board reviewed the data, because oftentimes as an executive director or chief operating officer, that's what you do, is you provide the board with the data, and they take that data and they make a decision. Compliance, are we in compliance with the law? Are we in compliance with our own policies and procedures? That's something that you as an administrator and the board also will be reviewing. And then enforcement and sanctions. Oftentimes when we talk about that, it's in regards to personnel decisions. Again, it's better that it's not just your decision, but it goes before the board. Now, granted, with very large organizations, a board's not going to be making these types of decisions if you've got a staff of 100 or 200, unless it's of a critical issue. Again, it depends on how the board is set up and how they operate. Even the Board of Trustees for the University of Arkansas, they make personnel decisions when they decide to hire, to promote, to fire. If you're a program chair or a dean, they're definitely going to be involved in the firing and the hiring as well. But on the other side, they may make block decisions at the recommendation of the president or the executive director. So accountability for what? So here are the 4 areas, and you can read the slide: finances, governance, performance, and mission. So are we being good stewards, if you will, with our finances? Are the internal controls, the legal compliance with governance, the performance in achieving results? That kind of gets into performance. Are we achieving our goals? Are we fulfilling the intent of what we're trying to do in the community? And then mission, are we the big, that's kind of is the ship in a big sense, are we moving in the right direction? Are we trying to achieve our core activity, or have we gotten off track? So that big strategic thinking is what you want the board to be doing. And that's why it's good to have board members from other organizations, other professions, especially have an attorney or someone who is in finance or accounting that can understand those other elements of running an agency. So it's often you've got subject matter experts that can give the agency guidance and direction. So governance accountability, it's centered on the board of directors. The board is responsible for oversight and legal compliance, as we mentioned. Standards of care, loyalty, and obedience. So are we achieving those standards? And that can also speak to ethical standards as well. Now, granted, a board's going to be composed, hopefully, of a lot of different disciplines. So you're going to have different ethical standards, which is not necessarily a bad thing. The board will have to sort of process, kind of a shared agreement on the standards that will be used. Increasing accountability or accountable for broader organizational purpose, performance strategy, maximizing social value. When you have funders, when you have patrons, when you have grants, again, it comes down to accountability. Are we truly accomplishing not only for our clients, but also for other stakeholders? Clients are stakeholders in an agency, but so are, maybe other healthcare organizations, perhaps funders, or as I mentioned, patrons. If you have a Walton grant, are we honoring that grant and the intent of that grant? So again, it's this broader picture of, are we reaching a standard, and are we being accountable for our actions, both individually and as an organization as a whole. Core duties of the board and its members. So again, it's structured and it's really there to govern. So we're talking about a governance board, not an advisory board. So to perform the work of governance, so the duty of care, so they're exercising judgment of a reasonable, prudent person. Does this make practical sense? Are we acting in good faith of our clients? And our clients can be, again, they're thinking about the agency, and so all participating members. So it can be staff and patients or clients, the community at large, and other stakeholders, if you will. The duty of loyalty, the advanced interest of organizations over self interest. So again, all of those different players, are we being loyal to them and not just trying to promote ourselves? When we talk about self-interest, we're really talking about not just our individual interest, but is the agency acting only on its own best interest, if that makes sense, and the duty of obedience to mission and laws. So again, these are all legal terms that can be used to hold a board accountable for their actions. So being on a board, there is a legal liability to being on a board. And so I've been on a few boards, and I've left a board or two because I felt like the direction that the agency and the board was going was not consistent with my both my personal values and my professional values as a social worker. Fiduciary responsibility. This is the big one, or one of the big ones. So again, I've seen all kinds of variability. So are we treating the financial resources in the organization consistent with its purpose? So are we following our policies, the financial and other policies? But in particular, financial, we're talking about fiduciary. First, you got to make sure your fiduciary policies are consistent with good practice in accounting. Have we established a budget? Are we monitoring that budget? This is number 3, ensuring compliance and performance. Is there some accountability for how things are spent? Do we have, like a lot of places have a policy that any purchases over $500 must be approved by the board, which is a pretty standard practice. Some, it might be $1,000. Depends on the size of the agency and the amount of money that we're dealing with. Are there quarterly financial reports? Are we auditing our books on a regular basis in an acceptable way? Because all of this are things that can get you in trouble. Just ask Donald Trump. Monitor results to ensure financial performance and health. Are we running in the black? Are we, or are we running in the red? Are there some outstanding liabilities, financial concerns that we're not being really prudent about? Like if the roof is going to be due, and you own the building and you're just avoiding that, and that's a financial irresponsibility. If you may be giving bonuses when the roof is going to be due and it should be okay, and again, that's where the board would really be involved. Employ regular external review process, and that's where the independent audit. Most reasonably sized organizations, and according to law, have to have an external audit done to make sure your accounting principles are up to snuff. That's one of the biggest killers of an organization, is if there's some financial mismanagement. People are not going to want to donate or invest or sometimes attend or even practice at your agency if there's financial mismanagement. It's the surest way to kill an organization, whether it's a nonprofit, a church. It just takes a lot of effort by the board and by you as an administrator to reverse that negative perception that can occur when you have that financial mismanagement. There's just so many opportunities to do that, have that mistake occur. So legal responsibilities. All board members are the legal caretakers of the agency. I like that term, legal caretakers. They're responsible for doing their best to ensure that the board as a whole is performing its legal responsibilities. Individual board members, as I mentioned, can be held liable as individuals for inappropriate organizational acts. You can be sued. Not paying taxes, not identifying conflicts of interest in contracts. You give a contract to your brother's, sister's, step uncle to, do the lawn care. Employment issues such as inappropriate firing and not protecting or failing to appropriately respond to allegations of harassment or sexual misconduct or dangerous facility conditions. So EEOC issues or OSHA issues are two things where legal responsibilities come into play. So EEOC is unfair hiring or firing based on discriminatory practices based on gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and so forth. A hostile work environment that cause harm can be an EEOC issue. Not addressing the mental wellness of your employees in high-risk environments, say if you deal with a lot of suicide or with substance abuse or the homeless where there are risk issues, those are certainly there. Hazardous chemicals, usually OSHA, we think about that, but the emotional side can also be an OSHA issue as well. Core functions of the typical nonprofit board. Here we see to lead the organization, policy, to establish policy. Usually that means the executive director, administrator provides a draft policy and procedures manual, and the board typically will give them feedback on it and approve it or request for revisions. Most good organizations, they will revisit that policies and procedures manual. That is your legal guidebook for how things are supposed to be working. Typically, they're looked at when there's a problem and you want to make sure you're covering your bases. And that's also when policies and procedures are revised, is when you have a problem and the policies and procedures don't cover it. And so you usually get to the problem and then you make changes to your policies and procedures manual. And that's okay. I mean, that's what our laws in our country are established when there is a problem. It's like, okay, we've got this going on, and we need to establish a law to prevent it from getting worse, like speeding. Speeding wasn't an issue when our cars only did 35 miles an hour. I guess it could be if you're in a, really slow area of town. But, we didn't establish those laws until there became a problem. The fatality rate said, okay, we need to put limits on our cars. Same thing in organizations. So you can kind of think in a way that our policies and procedures are sort of the laws of our organization. So again, assure the effective resource use. It's that accountability to lead and manage the chief executive performance. So again, they hire and really supervise your chief executive or administrator. They engage with constituents. They ensure and enable accountability, and they ensure board effectiveness. And like at the bottom here, they hire the CEO and executive director and set compensation. Boards can also be about fundraisers. Some boards, even the governing boards, they can be, because of their network, because of their position in a community, they can be key players to helping raise funds for an agency. Some boards actually will require their board members to donate money in lean times. I've never been on a board like that, but I've certainly had friends that have been on boards where they ask board members to pony up money when the budget is light. So the role, I'm not sure we're going to do this exercise, so we're going to skip over this. So I'm borrowing the slides from another professor. I've got some other ideas. So conflicts of interest. I know you've heard about these. It is not required that board members be free of conflicts of interest, or even employees. When I was an employee at the university, well, still am, but when I was a full-time U of A faculty member, or even in the VA, we have to disclose. Having a conflict of interest is not a no-go necessarily, but you do need to make sure that it's transparent and that people are aware of it. But they have to be handled appropriately and ethically. So most boards choose members based on their business or other experiences, which can result in a conflict. Organizations must have a clear conflict of interest policies, and members must not be present when matters are discussed. Let's say, again, conflict of interest could be the hiring and firing of particular people. Maybe if you're a building contractor and there's discussions about, you're agency, you're on the board, you're a contractor, and you submitted a bid to help build something for this agency ABC that you happen to be on their board. You'll need to excuse yourself during those discussions. You can still submit a bid, probably. Again, it depends on where the money's coming from. Sometimes federal grants and funders will have stipulations on conflicts of interest, but it's still possible. One of the interesting things where I live, there's been a problem, is the planning commission or planning board in the city has a lot of contractors on that board, and they have a lot of friends who are contractors, and so there's been some missteps and some conflicts of interest because they've had to make decisions on offering a contract to a friend's company and didn't disclose that conflict of interest. So, yeah. So participate actively. They know the mission, vision, and strategy. They make informed board decisions. That's your job, is to inform them. Some board members and some boards are naturally inquisitive. They understand. They're really engaged in the institution. Can be good, can be bad. But typically, you don't want to assume that of your board. You want to make sure you give them good information. Provide active support for fundraising, as I mentioned. Serve as ambassadors and advocates, are really marketing your organization. They provide support to staff and volunteers. They serve with honor and integrity, and they support board development, bringing in new people. You don't want your board to become static, just like the organization. You want to continue to bring in fresh board members. This is just kind of typical board structure. Well, you'll have an executive committee, which is usually the president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and so forth. You could have a nominating committee. That's typical, where they actually are continuously looking for new board members. Fundraising committee, finance, personnel, program. You see all of these different subcommittees of a board. So really, a board can be a very useful tool for you as an administrator, because they can either be creating policies and procedures or reviewing them and improving them. So it's like a quality check for your work. So it can be a really useful tool when it's a collaborative effort. Some boards, it can be really difficult, as you can imagine, because they kind of take too much ownership in the agency and start to micromanage. This video is online, so how board of directors impacts nonprofit success. So you can be watching that here shortly. Characteristics of strong board. They make good use of members' time. Meetings are well organized. Yes, they tend to follow Robert's Rules of Orders to some extent, but they flow and they're on time. They don't go over. That's a big killer of a board. They meet on a regular basis. That's a good functioning board. They know their role. If they're a governing board, is to advise, approve, give feedback, and move forward, and not get caught up in the weeds or to be totally disengaged on the other side of them. Matches the work it needs with the skills, abilities, and interest of its members. So they really tie, if you got a lot of finance issues and you happen to have a banker, or a CPA, then you make sure that coincides, or somebody on your board is in that area. Success is grounded in building effective relationships. I mean, that's man, we hear that all the time. Social workers get that. We know from clinical work that effective relationships is key. Same thing with boards, internal relationships, and the relationship with the executive director, senior administrator. One of the most valuable assets it brings to nonprofits is its members. Again, board members, connections, it's that network, that relationships with other organizations, other professions. and it creates an infrastructure of supports. The board is really about your agency, not necessarily about you. I mean, it's good if they need to be supportive of you, of course, but the agency is their primary focus. Growing a strong board, 8 core principles. A board's effectiveness is important to the organization's performance. Again, a lot of things travel downhill, and board effectiveness is one. It sets the tone. It must be, board design must be about the future. You don't want to get them lost in the past or dealing with previous traumas, if you will, for the organization. You want them to be moving forward. How are we growing and moving towards the future? You don't even want them present in the day-to-day. That is your job. They need to be looking down the road. The design and development needs to be aligned with the needs of the organization and the community. So they're in touch with the community. They're in touch with the issues that your agency is addressing and have a pulse on the community. They focus on principles, not best practices. Again, it's that forward looking. Your job is best practices. Theirs is to what is the intent? What are the principles of the organization that we're trying to accomplish? So, of course, leadership is critical. And boy, when you get a good board president, it will make a huge difference. They will know how a board operates. They have the experience. They're not getting into the weeds with you. They are a asset to not only the board, but to your organization. Performance derives from the behavior of people. So again, people that are cordial, they get along, sometimes well valued people or people that feel very passionate about an issue may not make the best board members. They may be great advocates, but sometimes in a leadership role, they're great about being out front and stirring things up, but not necessarily working on a team. I tell you, if you ever played team sports, that is one of the best ways to figure out how to work well on a team. Effective boards, by definition, are, and they're number 3, is their teams. They know everybody's role. They respect each other's role. There's confidence in the skills of the board. They support each other. So again, it's very effective when there's a team mentality, a collective mentality. Board development, so you don't want solo people. Board development must meet them where they are at the level of capacity and their abilities. So as an executive director, you may work with the board president to actually do board development, team building with the board. Because again, remember that other slide, that the effectiveness of your board is really going to impact the effectiveness of your organization. So, summary, governance boards are organized in a variety of ways, but all have core legal responsibilities. They're an essential source of leadership as they govern the nonprofit organization, and a critical link between nonprofit and the community it exists to serve. Board effectiveness is integral to organizational effectiveness. And here are some additional resources. All right, I kept it fairly short. Again, boards are awesome. If you've never been on a board, I would encourage you to get on a board, just so you kind of experience it. And man, I've had some wonderful experiences and some crazy experiences on boards. But the majority of them have been very good. And business-related boards are awesome because it seems like when you ascribe making money to an organization, they want to run well. And on the other side is there's a lot of nonprofits that run just as well as well. Okay? All right. Good luck. See you.